Okay, here we go. I'm going to go through the final slides now. There's 3 of them, and some of them are optional, like this one, the questionnaire. You don't have to do this. If you want 10 out of 10 for this section, this is probably advisable, okay? It doesn't have a deadline because you don't have to do it. But it supports your specification. And that's why I'm going to leave this here and I'm going to jump forward to the design brief and specification. This is due on the last day of term, 6th of July. What do you need to do? We need to write a brief, okay? Design brief is a brief passage, probably about 400 words, explaining what your project is going to be. Now, it's really an agreement between you and your client saying what you're going to make, what you're going to design, or you're going to design what you're going to make, so that both you and your client are on the same page, facing the same direction. So it should be something like, I intend to design and make a dog feeder that will be used in my kitchen for my mum when she goes away. The dog feeder needs to distribute food every 12 hours and needs to have enough food for the dog to last a week without being fed. That sounds a bit cruel. The feeder must be no bigger than 200 in width, 300 in height, and 500 in length, millimeters, for example. And should be made from sustainable materials such as wood. The interface or the control panel for the dog feeder needs to have buttons of 20 millimeters in width so that everyone in my user group, including more elderly people, can easily control the feeder with a simple tap of a button. Maybe it's intuitive, but you get what I'm saying. We've got a series, probably 4 different sentences making up one big paragraph explaining. You also want right at the end that the product needs to be made within a budget of 50 quid and it needs to be finished by it is February half term. So that is the design brief. Really simple, and you can go on to see a couple of design briefs on the next pages. Right, specification. What's your spec? Your spec is a table, and it's got your points, your spec points, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it explains the point briefly. For example, my product must be no higher. Whoa, out you go. Must be no higher than 200 millimeters in height. Well, why is that? That'll be in your second box. So your third box, sorry, I've got somebody coming in. Your third box will justify that. This is so that my product fits within the space or the alcove where it's going to be located. Once you've done that, you've got to justify in terms of your research. I found this out on page 7 where I did my science study. Okay, so just to go through that again, just a simple number. You make your spec point. You then go on to justify it in terms, ideally, of the user. You then explain where in your research you found that. And if you really want to go for the marks, you could go on to say how you could test if this is going to work or not. If it meets that specification point, for example, you could measure it with a ruler, or you could ask people their opinion on it and conduct a survey. So let's just go down and have a look. Here we are. So we've got a point down here, and we've got broadly some different areas. The product must be practical and effectively function as an electronic timed enclosure with a lock. We've got the justification here with the explanation, and that should include where in your study you find this information and the measurement. So this specification, this table, is a thing that you've been populating for the last couple of weeks, and this should have all your potential specification points. They should be all down here, maybe all jumbled up at the moment, but you really want it so that it's quite easy for you to write this. And it only needs to be like 15 points long, so it doesn't need to be exhaustive in any sense of the word. Right, so I hope you understand that. Now, you're going to make certain points, for example, like it should be I don't know, it'd be really good to be blue in color, a monochromed color scheme, something like that. Okay, and you're going to think, I've got no evidence to reinforce that point. I didn't ask my client that question, did I, when I started out this project? So how can I justify that point that I want to make, that I want it to have, curved edges? Well, that's where the specification comes in, because you've got 7 chances here to ask a question and get some feedback, and that can justify that particular specification point, which is really good. So if I was you, I would start off by writing your design brief, go on to fill out the rest of your specification, including, where possible, where in your evidence, in your research, you have found that out to be you can justify that specification point. And those that you can't, you go back and then you start writing your questionnaire. I hope that all makes sense. This is a bit you've really been waiting for, another one. So we've got another one, really simple one here. Nice clear points, just 1 point per line, and then a nice justification and explanation. How can you measure it? He's also put the measurement down there, and he's included what page you can find that out on, or that information out on. I hope it all makes sense. Anything else? Deadline for this, 6th of July. Of course, introduction, summary. We've got our user group questionnaire. Of course, we don't need to do this, but if you want to do this, you can. Ask 10 people to make sure your product can be commercially viable. Of course, what you want is potential spec points down on the bottom, and just those which will filter later into your specification. All right, I hope that makes sense.